A child in a deep coma returns with an unbelievable revelation. She claims to have been with Jesus and brings an urgent message to humanity. In this moving and faith-filled account, you will learn the details of a near-death experience that defies science and confirms God's teachings. Get ready to reflect, pray, and feel the divine presence in every word. What this child saw in heaven could transform his view of life, death, and the power of prayer. His name is Lucas Miller, a child of just 5 years old, resident of Spokane, a quiet, tree-lined town in the state of Washington, in the United States. Lucas was the type of boy who lit up the environments he went through, owner of a shy but charming smile, curious like every child, and especially sensitive to the things of God. Since I was very little, I asked about heaven, about angels, about the love of Jesus. The mother, Sarah, said that Lucas had a different light, and that light was about to pierce through a darkness that no one imagined. It was an ordinary afternoon when everything changed. Lucas was coming home from school with his father, walking down the sidewalk, talking about a cartoon he had seen. It was a normal scene, but within seconds a strong wind blew a piece of paper from his backpack, and like any curious child, he ran after it. But when crossing the street, a car appeared. The impact was direct. The small body was thrown to the ground. Time stopped. Screams, sirens, despair. The ambulance arrived quickly, but Lucas was already unconscious. Doctors acted urgently. It was hours of tension until the diagnosis arrived: severe head trauma. The boy fell into a deep coma. Brain activity was minimal, and with each passing day, hopes diminished. At the Spokane hospital, Sarah remained by her son's side. She barely ate, barely slept. The Bible was his constant companion. The doctors did everything they could, but beyond the machines and medicine, there was an atmosphere in Lucas's room that no one could explain. Nurses commented on a strange peace that hung in the air. There was something different about that place, as if someone invisible was there watching over the boy. The days dragged on, and the silence became more painful every morning. Sarah prayed fervently. She asked God to speak to her, give a sign, and that if it were His will, that she could at least hug her son once again. Their cry was not one of despair. It was of faith, delivery, and of love. Lucas was motionless, connected to life support, but there were moments when his heart raced, even without stimulation. Moments when the heartbeat changed slightly when someone started to pray. Coincidence? The doctors couldn't say, but for Sarah, that was no coincidence. She felt, with all her soul, that something was happening. Something the eyes couldn't see. On the 8th day of hospitalization, the routine seemed to repeat itself. Silence, machines beeping, murmured prayers. Sarah knelt by the bed and said, "Lord, if you still have plans for my son, I'm here. Talk to me, or him." It was at that moment that something changed. Lucas took a deep breath. His eyes, previously closed, began to move slowly behind his eyelids. The little right hand moved, and suddenly, without warning, he opened his eyes. Slowly, like someone waking up from a very deep sleep. The mother choked on tears. The father, who had just arrived at the room, stopped at the door, unable to believe what he saw. Lucas was awake, and even though his eyes were still fragile, he seemed at peace, as if he had just returned from a long trip. He didn't cry. He didn't panic. He just looked at his mother tenderly, and in a weak voice, he said her name. The hospital went into commotion. Doctors rushed to evaluate. Exams were redone. Everyone wanted to understand, how was that possible? His condition did not indicate any chance of awakening spontaneously, but Lucas was there, alive, awake, and serene. And that's when everything started to change. The expression on the boy's face carried something difficult to describe. It wasn't just relief, not just lucidity. It was as if he had seen something that completely transformed his essence, as if his eyes weren't the same anymore. But the most impressive was yet to come. What had Lucas experienced during those days of silence? Where did he go while his body lay there, motionless? What did he see, feel, hear? Questions began to arise, and while doctors searched for clinical explanations, the mother knew. That look said much more than any exam could show, and at that moment her heart already felt that the answer came from above. Whoever returns from death doesn't just bring a story, he brings a calling. This message reached you for a reason. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and continue this journey that can transform everything you believe about life and what comes next. Lucas still didn't say much. He was awake, but his gaze seemed fixed on something far away, as if a part of his consciousness was still somewhere else. Doctors said it was normal after a long coma, but his mother, Sarah, knew. What she saw in her son's eyes was neither confusion nor delirium. It was depth, as if he were bringing with him memories of a place adults have forgotten how to reach. On the third day after waking up, it was during a silent afternoon, with the sound of breathing machines filling the room, that Lucas began to count. At first, simple words, fragments, and then suddenly, as if a dam had broken inside him, the details began to emerge. He said that at the moment everything went dark. He felt no pain. It was like closing your eyes and leaving your body behind. Like taking off tight clothes, he described with the naturalness of someone talking about a dream. He said he floated up, very fast. And soon the hospital room became so small that it looked like a miniature. But what came next was something impossible to describe with human words, according to him. Lucas said that everything around him was being filled with a very intense light, which changed color smoothly, from gold to crystalline white, as if it were made of feelings, not ordinary energy. He felt warm, but not physical heat. It was something that seemed to pierce the chest, warm the soul, calm the thoughts. It was as if that light knew me, he said with a distant look. The sound. Lucas explained that there was no silence, no noise. What there was music that didn't come from outside but from inside him, a soft melody that made him want to stay there forever. The music hugged me, Mommy, he said in a low voice, and she spoke to me even without words. As he counted, his voice seemed choked with an emotion that he himself couldn't understand. Sarah didn't interrupt. He just listened, with teary eyes and a racing heart. Lucas's father, sitting at the back of the room, tried to write down every word, as if he were afraid that his son would forget some detail. Lucas said that as he was climbing, he saw people, many people, but he wasn't scared. They were luminous, translucent figures, some with white clothes, others with bluish cloaks, all very serene. The most impressive? He stated that he knew some of those people, even though he had never seen them. I knew who they were, but I don't remember meeting them here. It was as if his soul recognized something that his mind still couldn't explain. Among these figures, one approached with more intensity. He couldn't see it completely, because the glow was so strong, but he felt a presence that called him with love, a love so deep, so absolute, that it made him feel as if he had never been separated from that essence. And then he listened. For the first time, a voice spoke his name. And that voice was unlike any other. Lucas. That was it. But the impact was immense. He said that when he heard his name, something inside him lit up. A kind of old memory. A memory that he never experienced, but that always existed. He hasn't seen the face of that presence yet, but he knew with unshakable certainty that he was no ordinary person. As I floated higher, the surrounding landscape opened up. He described enormous fields of light, trees that seemed to be made of crystal, and that played a melody when the wind blew through them. He said he saw shiny structures as big as mountains, but as light as cotton, and everything was surrounded by an air of purity, of deep peace, peace that no pain in the world could disturb. Lucas said he tried to speak, but realized he didn't need to use his mouth there. All I had to do was think, and the answer would come. As if all thoughts were connected to the truth. It was as if in that place there was no room for lies nor for fear, and because of that, he didn't feel like going back. He described that at one point he was surrounded by a kind of mist of light, like a cocoon, which guided him without him having to move, and everything around him seemed to respond to his presence. It was as if the environment itself was alive, alert to his arrival. And then he stopped. The light ahead intensified. The surrounding figures retreated. The sound became softer, and the fog slowly opened. At this moment, Lucas took a long pause while counting. He looked at his mother, and his eyes filled with tears. He didn't speak anymore. He just took a deep breath. Sarah didn't insist. He just held his hand. There was a respectful silence in the room, a silence that required no explanation, because something was happening there. Something sacred, something that didn't need to be understood, but just felt. And the strangest thing was that as he counted, the room seemed to transform. The temperature felt warmer, the lighter air. Even the machines seemed to make softer sounds. The nurses said that Lucas seemed to be at absolute peace, even with all the physical trauma, as if nothing that had happened had left a mark. Lucas went on to say that while he was in that place, he had no memory of his body. He didn't remember the hospital. It was as if the reality here had stopped mattering. He just felt that he was being loved, with a love that demanded nothing, just welcomed. He said he couldn't explain in words what he felt, but that he would never forget it. And now, everything was different. Lucas was still holding his mother's hand, his eyes fixed on something only he seemed to see. His presence was different now, lighter, more peaceful. As if every cell in your body carried a new vibration, something that no medical treatment or scientific explanation could justify. And then, after a long pause, he began to speak again. The voice was low, almost like a whisper, but firm. After the mist parted, I saw him. Those words made Sarah's heart race. She didn't need to ask who him was. She knew. The whole room seemed to know. The air became denser, but not heavy. It was as if the atmosphere had been enveloped by something invisible, but real, something holy. Lucas continued. It was a light greater than all the others, but it didn't hurt my eyes. I couldn't look straight for long, but when I looked, I saw his face. The room fell silent. The mother tried not to cry. She just listened, with her body leaning forward, as if she didn't want to miss a single word. He was smiling at me. It wasn't an ordinary smile. It was as if the whole world fit in that smile, as if he had known me forever. Lucas then stopped for a moment, squinting his eyes, as if trying to remember more precisely. And then he said something that made a lump form in the throat of everyone in the room. "Mommy, when Jesus looked at me, I felt that I was important to him, even though I was small, even though I didn't understand everything. I felt that he loves me, more than anything." This sentence, said so simply, broke Lucas's father's composure, who until then had remained silent in the corner of the room. He slowly got up and went to the window, trying to hide his tears. That skeptical man, who had strayed from faith for many years, could no longer deny what he felt at that moment. Luke said Jesus approached him, who didn't walk, but moved as if he were part of the light itself. His presence was strong, but at the same time welcoming. It did not cause fear, but reverence. He called me by name again, but this time it was different. It was like my name had a sound I'd never heard before, like he had written it in the sky. The mother asked, her voice shaking. "Do you remember what he said, son?" Lucas nodded and responded with something he could never have invented on his own. He said this, "Lucas, you still have a mission on earth. Your time has not yet come, but you need to tell what you saw. Because many have forgotten me. Many think they know, but they don't really know me. Tell them I keep waiting." Sarah put her hand over her mouth, trying to stop herself from crying. It wasn't just the content of the words, it was the tone, the conviction. Lucas spoke like someone who is not just remembering, but reliving each moment. And then he continued, saying that in that place, he didn't just see Jesus, he felt Jesus. It was as if he was inside me and around me at the same time. When he spoke, his voice entered my heart, and everything that was dark disappeared. Luke began to describe the face of Jesus. He said that he had deep, honey-colored eyes, but that they changed tone as he looked. When he looked at me, it seemed like I was immersed in them, as if they were infinite. The hair, according to Lucas, fell to the shoulders with golden highlights, and the cloak was white, but had a shine that seemed to come from within him. And it was at that moment that Lucas took a long pause. The room was filled with reverent silence. Nobody wanted to break that moment. Then he said very quietly, "He was crying." Sarah looked scared. "Was he crying?" Lucas nodded, but it wasn't sadness. It was as if it was a mixture of love and pain, as if he was feeling the weight of what is happening on earth. He said that many are losing themselves, and that his pain is not out of anger. It is out of love, because he doesn't want to lose anyone. Those words were caught in the air, as if time itself had stopped to listen. There were no sounds in the room, just the soft beeps of the machines and Lucas's slow breathing. He said Jesus touched him. With one hand, he placed it right in the center of the boy's chest. When he put his hand here, Lucas said, pointing to the heart. I felt a light coming in, and it felt like everything that was fear went away. I didn't know what sadness was anymore. I just knew that he was real. And then Lucas said something even more profound. He didn't speak in words like we do. It was as if I understood everything he wanted to say, even when he was just looking at me. Sarah asked, "Did you ask him anything?" Lucas was silent for a moment. Then he replied, "I asked if I was going to come back, and he said yes, that my story wasn't over yet, that I was going to come back to tell it." Sarah tried to contain her emotion, and Lucas concluded, "Before going, he said that many people were waiting for a sign, and that I would be one of them." At that moment, Sarah could no longer hold back her tears. "And you? Are you still here with me? Maybe you felt something you can't explain. A chill, a different silence, a presence that enveloped you as you listened to this story. When the truth touches the spirit, it does not need proof, only an answer. So write in the comments, 'Jesus, talk to me.' You still haven't seen everything Lucas experienced. What came next touched not only the heart of the family, but of everyone who heard this testimony. Luke had described Jesus with a calm that transcended his age. His voice, despite being weak, carried a weight that came not from the body but from the soul. He seemed to have a wisdom in his eyes that cannot be taught, only experienced. With each sentence he said, the hospital room stopped seeming like an ordinary place. It was as if the presence of the divine was still there, accompanying his words. But there was something that hadn't yet been said. Something that, since he woke up, Lucas had avoided touching. A part of the experience he was hesitant to reveal. The mother, realizing this, respected the silence. I knew there was something more, something deep, something difficult. It was only on the fourth day after waking up that Lucas began to show signs of restlessness. He kept staring at the wall as if waiting for something. I slept little. Sometimes I woke up sweating with teary eyes, not out of fear, but out of urgency, as if he carried information inside him that needed to come out. In the morning of that day, as the sun broke through the bedroom blinds and the light touched the boy's pale face, he finally spoke. "And what you said changed everything. There's something Jesus showed me." Sarah approached, holding her son's hand tightly but saying nothing. I just waited. It was something that made me sad, and that wasn't for me. It was for the world. The temperature of the room seemed to drop. The feeling was that the air had become heavier. Lucas looked down as if he was still processing this. He took me to a place that was very dark. I don't know where it was, but it looked like Earth, only different. I saw people, lots of people, running, screaming. They looked scared, but the strangest thing was that they didn't see each other. They were in the same place, but it was as if they were alone. Lucas took a deep breath, and his eyes watered. It was the first time he showed discomfort while telling something. There was smoke in the sky, the buildings were crooked, the trees dead, but what scared me most was the sound. It was a sound that hurt inside, like the world was crying. Sarah swallowed. The father on the other side of the room slowly looked up. Silence took over the environment. Lucas continued, "And then Jesus appeared beside me. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at it, with sadness. I looked at him and asked, 'Why is this happening?' Lucas took a long pause before continuing, and in a low voice he replied, 'Because they forgot me, because they exchanged the truth for lies, because they are building the world without love, without repentance, without faith.'" Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but she didn't say anything. Lucas's voice seemed to come from another time, another dimension. "Jesus told me that a lot can still change, but that time is getting short. He said he doesn't want anyone to get lost, but that many are walking away, further and further away." Lucas then stared at his mother. "And he said something she will never forget. He said I needed to tell this, that people need to know that he's still calling, but they're ignoring it." Lucas's breathing quickened a little. He held his mother's hand tightly, and he continued, "I saw empty churches, but I also saw crowds in places of lies, people being deceived, seeking answers where there is no truth." He said, "Tell them that deception is growing, and many are falling without realizing it." The father got up, slowly approaching the bed. His eyes were red. He was a man of science, skeptical by nature, but what his son said made something inside him break. Lucas looked at him and said, Jesus said that parents need to go back to praying with their children, that homes are getting cold, that love is fading, and that's why the darkness is growing. The boy, his voice weaker now, seemed to be reliving everything he had seen. There was no hysteria. There was no exaggeration. Just true, raw, painful, and sacred. He showed me a cities, and I saw many lights going out, one by one. Every time someone forgot him, the light went out. Sarah asked, "Did you see anything else?" Lucas nodded slowly. I saw that there was still hope. He showed me a place with a lot of light, where people prayed together. They cried, they sang, and as they did that, the light came back. The room became silent again. It was as if everyone there had been placed in front of a mirror of the soul. Nothing else seemed to matter. Not the hospital, not the diagnosis, not the medical procedures. The only thing that mattered was the truth that came out of that child's mouth. And you who are here listening to this, have you ever stopped to think about what God might be trying to say to you through a 5-year-old child? Could this be his way of warning us before it's too late? Are you also among those who, without realizing it, have let their faith gradually fade away? Is there a part of your heart that still hears, even if quietly, his voice calling you? Lucas didn't speak again that day. After that, he slept soundly, as someone who had accomplished part of the mission. But his gaze, that different glow, it was still there. And what do you feel now? After that day, nothing was the same in the lives of the Miller family. The hospital, which until then had been a scene of anguish, silent struggles, and sleepless nights, began to carry a different energy. People who entered Lucas's room said there was something different there. Some nurses commented in low tones that they felt chills, but not from fear, but rather that strange sensation of being in front of something that goes beyond the visible. Others reported feeling peaceful, a deep, almost palpable peace, as if the environment had been visited by something celestial, and the echo of it was still hanging in the air. The medical team, even though they maintained their professional skepticism, could not ignore the facts. Lucas's condition had changed suddenly. His physical recovery was exceeding all expectations. And even more intriguing than that was the sparkle in his eyes, the clarity with which he spoke about what he experienced, the serenity with which he faced everything, as if he already knew something that everyone else was still trying to understand. His father, Thomas, was always a tougher, more rational man, one of those who avoided spiritual matters for fear of appearing weak. But upon seeing his son speaking with so much conviction, reporting visions that touched the deepest layers of the human heart, something inside him began to transform. He started to observe more, listen more. He spent long minutes in silence at his son's bedside, holding his little hand and without realizing it going back to praying. And it wasn't a memorized, hurried prayer. They were simple words, broken, but loaded with truth. Words from someone who after a long time was reuniting with the divine. Sarah, the mother, had become a kind of guardian of her son's story. He began to record every detail, every word, every image that Luke described. And little by little I felt that their mission was not just to survive that trauma, but to share the light they had received. She started talking to other mothers at the hospital, and the story spread by word of mouth. Nurses started talking to colleagues, and soon the story of the boy who woke up from a coma with a divine message began to leave the hospital walls and touch the community. The local church, where the family had not attended for months, found out about what had happened. The pastor, upon hearing the initial report, asked to visit Lucas in the hospital. The meeting was exciting. The boy looked at the man naturally, as if he already knew him, and said something that left the pastor in tears. Jesus said that shepherds need to remember that the flock is his, not theirs. That broke any formality. The two prayed together, and it was during this visit that the seed of reconnection began to sprout. Days later, when Lucas was discharged, a special service was held at the church. Nothing too big, just a moment to be thankful. But what happened there exceeded any expectations. The small chapel was packed. People who hadn't seen each other in years were there. Entire families knelt. People who had lost their faith cried in silence, listening to the story that, for the first time, Lucas told outside the hospital environment. He spoke simply. No theatricality, no exaggerated emotion, but each word came with a weight that went through the ears and straight to the heart. It was as if that child was saying in a thin, sweet voice things that the adults had forgotten, but that they still knew deep down in their souls. At the end of that meeting, silence spoke louder than any applause. People didn't want to leave. Some stood in front of the altar, just staring into space, reflecting. Others approached the family, asked for prayers, and told their own stories. And so, something started to happen in that community. Prayer groups were created. Young people who previously laughed at spiritual things began to search. Couples in crisis decided to try again. Parents returned to praying with their children before bed. And the church, which had been empty, became full again. But not because of a spectacular miracle. It was because of a boy who, without asking for anything, just shared what he saw. A boy who was chosen to remember the forgotten, to revive the flames that time and pain had almost extinguished. And it wasn't just the church that felt the impact. The school where Lucas studied was also touched. Teachers got closer to students. Directors allowed moments of reflection in the classroom. Some children, Lucas's classmates, started asking different questions. They wanted to know about heaven, about God, about what Luke had seen. And innocently, he just smiled and said, "I just know that Jesus loves you." People from other cities began to visit Spokane. Some came to listen in person. Others just wanted to say thank you. They brought letters, gifts, prayers. A couple from Texas traveled more than 2,000 kilometers after seeing an excerpt from the story published by a Christian page on social media. They had lost their 6-year-old son months earlier and said Lucas's testimony gave them hope of finding him again one day. And that's what it all revolves around deep down. Hope. Lucas's story began with pain, uncertainty, suffering, but it awakened something that seemed dormant in people, a thirst for reconnection, a sincere desire to return to God, not for a religion, not out of fear of the end, but for love, for longing for a place that the soul remembers, even if the mind has forgotten. And that impact didn't stop in Spokane. People began to share videos, excerpts from the story, reflections inspired by the boy's testimony, Christian blogs, spirituality channels, online communities, all touched by that little seed. And each new report, each comment of rekindled faith was like a flame that reignited in some dark corner of the world. Are you listening to this now? Do you feel your heart racing? Do you feel like this story is not just entering your ears, but piercing your soul? After Lucas' story began to spread, something curious started to happen. People who had never spoken about their own experiences began to tell. People who had kept memories that seemed like dreams for years, sensations they never dared to describe, began to find the courage to share. They were stories of unexpected encounters, visions in moments of pain, messages received in the silence of the early morning, voices that whispered comfort during loss, invisible touches in desperate situations, or that unexplained peace in the darkest moment of life. And maybe now, as you listen to this story, something inside you is moving too. Some souvenir, some sensation. Maybe you've experienced something similar and never been able to name it. Maybe he felt like he was being protected, or hearing your name called when no one else was around. Has it ever happened to you? Have you ever had an experience that simply has no explanation? Have you ever gone through a moment where everything said there was no way out, and suddenly something invisible changed the course of history? Maybe you woke up from a dream and felt a presence in your room, or looked at the sky on any given day and, without understanding why, felt like crying. Have you ever stopped to think if this crying was a longing for a place your soul knows, a place Lucas saw, a place where we all come from? Is this all just a coincidence? Does our existence really end here? Are you here now listening to this story just by chance? Or is it that deep down you feel like you are being called? Because there are times when God does not speak with words. He speaks with silences, with memories, with stories like this. He speaks through children. He speaks through experiences that are beyond what science can measure. And he speaks, mainly, through what touches our spirit. And if right now you're feeling something different, it's because maybe, yes, he is talking to you right now. This story is not here to scare you, not even to convince you of anything. She is here to remind you. Remember that there is something bigger, something deeper, something that no pain can erase and no void in the world can fill. You may have walked away. It may have discredited it. You may even have hardened your heart in the face of the wounds that life has caused. But still, if you've come this far, it's because there's something inside you that's still alive. A flame, even if small, even if hidden under pain, under time, under tiredness, still a flame. And maybe it's time to let that flame grow. Maybe you never had the courage to tell what you experienced. that feeling of leaving your body, that presence that accompanied you in the hospital, that dream that kept repeating itself, or that premonition that saved you. But no, you are not alone. Many people went through something similar and also kept it silent. But now, perhaps it's time to break this silence, not out of curiosity, but on purpose. You have a story inside you, a memory, a restlessness, and maybe you don't even need to understand now, but you need to accept that it is there and allow God to speak to you through it. So I invite you, with all due respect and truth, share your experience in the comments. It doesn't matter if it was small, if it was in a dream, if it was a strange feeling that you couldn't explain. This can touch other people. This could be the confirmation someone needs to believe again. Write it like this: I experienced something that I could never explain, or this reminded me of something that happened to me. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who is feeling alone, someone who has lost someone who once had a sign but ignored it, send this video. Share with that person. It could be a friend, a relative, someone from church, or even someone you love who no longer believes in anything. This could be the spark that rekindles a dormant faith. Many people are tired of ready-made speeches, cold explanations, and lifeless religiosity. But stories like this touch, because they are real, because they come from within, because they remind us that heaven is closer than we think, and that God, yes, is still speaking to humanity, often through the small, the unlikely, the forgotten. Maybe what you're feeling right now has no name, but it has direction. Maybe you don't know what to do, but you know you no longer want to ignore that voice that calls you. Some experiences don't need explanation, just delivery. When something involves you in a way that logic cannot reach, when peace arrives for no apparent reason, when a forgotten memory returns with force, it is because something bigger is calling you. And maybe this channel is exactly where your soul needed to go. Here, we talk about real experiences, of living faith, of life beyond death, and of a God who still speaks and calls by name. Some stories don't come to you by chance. When something inside you starts to move, when the feeling that there is more than meets the eye becomes impossible to ignore, it is a sign that you are being led. Here, each story carries more than words. It carries signs, answers, and warnings that can transform your view of life, death, and what exists after. So, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's something here your soul needs to hear. Getting here is not by chance. When something inside you recognizes the truth, even without understanding everything, it is because your soul heard something that goes beyond what was said. Comment below: I heard the voice of God. These words are not just a comment. They are a silent testimony that something has awakened inside. When a message touches you deeply, it can't stop with you. There are people now living in the silence of doubt, waiting for a sign, for an answer that might come through this video. By leaving a like, you help this story reach those who need to hear it most. This isn't just a gesture, it's part of the purpose. Something brought you here, and maybe what comes next is exactly what your soul was hoping to find. The next video is now on screen, ready to take you even deeper into this journey. Continue. You will understand why.